All right, we're
Good
live.
evening, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good night tonight. We've got a fun webinar put together for you all.
Yeah, we are so excited about Boulder Ridge townhomes. It's just kind of this like really perfect constellation of being able to acquire an asset that's very operationally distressed, that has really solid bones, that's in a wonderful location, that we have a clear plan to increase the asset value by about $8 million over just a few years. So very excited to present this deal to you tonight. Can't wait till closing. Like we're like counting down the days till closing. So excited about officially bringing this asset into the Black Swan portfolio. So let's jump into our presentation. I believe we have chat and Q&A enabled. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop those in. And as usual, we try to incorporate those into the presentation as they fit in. And then we have time at the end for Q&A to make sure that we get everything. So we want to make sure that when you leave tonight, you have all of your questions answered about this really amazing community.
Yeah, this is a deal where it's almost unbelievable some of the operational improvements that we're going to be able to make. So we hope that you're asking those questions literally and figuratively as we're going through this webinar. And while this is a deal that is in Black Swan Fund 4, and that fund does have a couple million of room left at this time, this is definitely not like an infomercial for Fund 4 or anything like that. We hope that this is a learning opportunity for you. And please, pepper us with questions as we go through. We'd love to answer your questions you have about how to find a deal, how to finance a deal, how to ultimately operate that deal for amazing wealth creation.
Absolutely. Let's get started. We'll go ahead and share our slides here. So our topic of the evening is our Boulder Ridge townhome community. Our usual disclaimer, in this presentation tonight, we will be presenting our business plan for the Boulder Ridge townhome acquisition that will be part of Black Swan Real Estate Fund 4. Everything that we present here is either based on our historical performance in our portfolio or our projections for the future. But of course, projections are never guaranteed. Real estate investing always has risk, including potential loss of capital. You should review the private placement memorandum, the operating agreement, and review everything with your trusted advisors prior to making any investment decision.
Well done.
Thank
That
you.
was crisp delivery there, babe. And if this is your first time joining us, just a little bit about us and why you might want to listen to some of the things that we have to share with you, why our opinions have a little bit of weight. We have about $375 million in assets under management. That's about 1,500 doors, most of them here in Rochester, Minnesota, some in Tacoma, Washington. And something that really sets us apart is we do that in a vertically integrated fashion. So we, instead of hiring vendors to do our property management, to do our maintenance, our lawn, our snow, those are all our W-2 employees, the people that we get the privilege to lead on a daily basis. So we've got about 50 employees here just in the Rochester area alone. And all this is aggregated into a private equity fund structure. We've raised over $70 million. You can go to blackswanfund4.com if you'd like to get involved there. We've got a real estate sales team. It's a pretty good real estate sales team, if you ask me. I'm biased, of course. We've got over $180 million of lifetime real estate sales. It's not something we talk about a huge amount in these webinars. It's just talking to a client today about listing a home for sale, something that we do quite a bit of. And then we've done a little bit of ground up construction as well, with over $50 million of ground up construction. Just finished a 5-year construction project on a beautiful Class A townhome community within the last couple of months. That's been a exciting milestone to hit there.
I don't even know if you saw it yet, but we got the email today from our builder that said final draw.
Oh,
it was like a bittersweet moment, like exciting that we're like done with that community, but also like, wow, we've been working on it for many years now. And so that's a little bit about us, a little bit about some of the things that make us different from other operators. Is kind of a lot of the things that we do in terms of mindset and business planning is very different. So number one is all of the debt in our portfolio is fixed rate debt. We've always been big believers in fixed rate debt, particularly over the last several years as interest rates were at those all-time historic lows. We, kind of looked ahead and said, if they're this low, they kind of have nowhere to go except up. And so we chose not to get any variable rate debt. Everything in our portfolio is fixed rate. And that has created a lot of stability for our portfolio over the last several years, while there's been a lot of headwinds in the market because of interest rates. The debt on this new acquisition is very low, sub 4.5%, and is fixed rate debt. So we're excited to continue that track record. We have long-term debts. We try to get 5-year terms, 10-year terms if we can get them, basically as long as we can make it work out with that bank so that we lock in that interest rate for as long as possible. And then that means no rate caps, no escalating debt service as interest rates go up, all of the headwinds that have happened over the last several years. We stay incredibly liquid. Nick talked about our vertical integration inside of our property management company, Black Swan Living. And we're invested in blue ocean markets. We're invested in Rochester, Minnesota and Tacoma, Washington. We've tended to stay away from some of the hotter markets like Phoenix or the Carolinas or many of the markets in Texas that kind of have like a boom and a bust cycle. And we're happy for that, that our asset values have tended to stay quite stable through the headwinds in the industry in the last several years. And it allows us to be a big fish in a smaller market. And then all of that means no capital calls and on-time distribution. So we're excited about our asset performance and our fund performance over the last several years. I know our investors tend to have a lot of peace of mind, a lot of serenity, knowing that their investments are doing really well. And we're excited to continue that with our acquisition that's coming up for Boulder Ridge Townhomes. Look at that beauty.
It is beautiful.
It is. It's like, and you really can't like capture the beauty of this community until you're there. It's such a large campus. You can see, you know, just in this picture, there's so many different types of trees. You kind of feel like you're in this forest setting. It was built by a luxury home builder, and you can see that reflected in the design aesthetic. You can see it almost sort of looks like one large single family home, like each individual building sort of has the feel of like a large single family home with the roof lines and the siding and the decks. It's just such a gorgeous community with beautiful buildings, wonderful landscaping, wonderful abundant green space, and lots of really good deal fundamentals as well.
So here's how you create life-changing generational wealth. Again, we hope that you take away a lot of lessons from this time that we get to share together tonight. I hope that you get to see, a glimpse of the world through, sort of the lens that Elaine and I look at it. Whenever we look at an investment opportunity in any asset class, whatever, there's just a few basic fundamentals that we're looking for. And in, Black Swan Real Estate Fund 1, Fund 2, Fund 3, Fund 4, our personal portfolio going back a decade, we have a really simple business plan. That's to find a really good deal on an asset, to buy something with value, to get really good debt on that asset, and something that we really pound the table.
That's our soapbox thing.
That's right.
The debt.
The debt makes the deal. All the time that people spend on finding a good deal on an asset, they should spend just as much time finding a good deal on the debt. Then operational excellence. So that's something that really sets us apart, is we have vertically integrated property management. We do the hard work that other people just aren't willing to do. Property management is hard, but that's where all the value comes from. And this particular asset, it's going to be kind of a tale of two cities. It has just a current ownership group that is a beautiful group with a great mission, and they realize that they are operationally underwater and no longer able to serve that mission, which is why they've had to sell this asset. And it's our operational excellence that's ultimately allowed us to be the group that's able to purchase this deal. And then finally, how all these things put together allow you to increase the value of the asset. And then you could sell the asset if you want to, or if you're like us, you could do a cash out refinance to recover that capital that you put into it and go buy another asset, another asset, another asset. And these are it right here. There's the deal, the debt, and the operations, and those three things, they feed into creating legacy, building wealth.
So let's talk about the summary for that and what we're going to walk through during our time together tonight. So this is kind of your Cliff Notes version. If you're, wrangling, finishing up work or taking care of the kids or getting a run in or something, and you just want the too long, didn't read, here it is. So what's the deal? We're acquiring a high quality townhome community. We're going to show you how we'll walk into the deal with about 2.2 million of day one equity. And that's against a purchase price of about 20 million. So about 10% day one equity, even amidst all of the headwinds that are in the industry right now, and how we're acquiring this for 33% less than a directly comparable sale that transacted in December of 2023. And I point that out because it transacted while interest rates were at their historic high. So sometimes people will compare assets that transacted in, say, 2021 or 2022. Well, that's kind of an unfair comparison because interest rates were so low then. But we're acquiring this for a third less than a direct comp that transacted during the current interest rate environment. Super excited about our debt, 4.47% fixed, sub 4.5. Like, to even start with a 4
Mm.
is just wow. Like we're so excited about that. That gives us a lot of peace of mind, gives our investors in this deal a lot of peace of mind. As Nick mentioned, we're going to talk much of our time tonight about operations and how the story of this asset is operational efficiency. So anytime someone's acquiring a piece of real estate, there's really two ways to add value: physical renovations and operational improvements. It's almost always a combination of both. In this one, we will be doing physical improvements. We do in almost all of our communities, but that's a relatively smaller portion of our value add plan here. The extreme majority of our value add plan is improving the operations and therefore lowering the costs with things like in-house management, maintenance, turnovers, lawn, and snow. And then we have a proven plan to increase the NOI, the net operating income, by $1 million, which we believe will translate into about an $8 million increase in asset value. Some of my more astute investors might be thinking, well, like, what's the multiple there, right? NOI at a 5 cap would be an increase in $20 million of asset value. And while we wish that that could happen, of course, there's just limitations based on the per unit cost, the debt service cover ratio. But we're really excited about being able to acquire something at right around 20 million and have a proven plan over just a couple of years to increase the value of that asset by $8 million so that we can exercise our cash out refi plan and hold this thing indefinitely and enjoy those infinite rate of return. I'm excited.
So while we hope this is like very educational for you, let's also explicitly call out that we've got somewhere between 2 and 3 million left of room in Black Swan Fund 4, which is the entity that will own Boulder Ridge Townhome. So if you are interested in investing, you can go to blackswanfund4.com. You can block a time on Elaine and I's calendar if you'd like to chat, or if you want to get in, you can get in about 15 minutes to go through everything. So check it on out.
Absolutely. All right. So we talked about those 4 pieces: the deal, the debt, the operations, and increasing asset value. So let's dive into part 1, the deal.
So this is a 112 townhome community in Apple Valley, Minnesota, which is kind of a nice suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's kind of partway between Rochester and Minneapolis, St. Paul. So it's great that it's going to leverage our operational excellence here in Rochester, take advantage of all the vertical integration we have here: in-house lawn, in-house snow, in-house construction, and turn crews, while giving us like kind of exposure to another market. This particular asset is really neat that it's 48 townhome style units. Some of those are over 2,000 square feet, and then 64 apartment style units. I say apartment style, but every single one of those units has a private attached garage. So you don't have to like go outside to get to a garage unit or anything like that. It has a huge amount of unit diversity, which you typically don't find in a townhome community. And these units are they're enormous. The smallest unit size is 1,000 square feet. It's 1,000 square feet, 1 bedroom apartment. Whereas in our market here in Rochester, that would be easily like a 2 bed, 2 bath unit. So these units, it's difficult to describe just how gargantuan they are. And when you buy an asset, there's some things you can't change. You can't change the location of that asset.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do much to change the neighbors. And you can't do much to really add square footage to that asset. You can go through and change the finishes, change the signage, change the landscaping, change all the exterior look and feel to it, but it's very difficult to add square footage. So we love that this is an asset that has a ton of intrinsic value. We also look for something that we like to call a prepaid capital expenditure. So an asset where the current ownership group has spent a lot of money on things that are expensive. So in this case, it's all new roofs, lots of new siding. They did all new asphalt surface covering, new concrete hardscaping. They've done the things that are really expensive to do to an asset, but frankly don't really add a lot of value. Someone is not going to necessarily pay like a more premium rental rate because there's brand new asphalt or because there's a brand new roof. Most people don't even realize how old the roof is, and yet the current ownership group has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars putting all new roofs on this asset, so it's good to go for the next 30 years. We love that this site has a lot of green space. We're going to be able to upgrade that with amenities like a dog park. We might put in some ancillary structures. There's just such an abundance of space on this site. There's currently what we'll call a fitness center, but we're going to upgrade it, make it I think the soda machine might take up more space than the exercise equipment right now. So it's kind of the opposite of a gym. We're going to turn that around and make it a true full-blown fitness center. There's so much opportunity with this site to add value in an asymmetric way, where we're not going to have to spend a huge amount of money to create real honest to God value for the tenants that live there and enjoy calling this place home.
This is another example of how you can see that this community was built from the perspective of a luxury home builder. So you can see how there's a garage there that someone might pull in, exactly like if they were pulling into a single family home. And then inside they go up their stairwell into their unit. Same thing with that single stall garage that will enter into one of the apartment units. So unlike, say, a shared parking structure or a shared parking lot and then entering through like a common main door and then taking an elevator to your floor and then walking to your unit in a more traditional apartment style building, as Nick mentioned, these feel like single family homes because they all have direct access. That translates to a more premium living experience, which translates to a more premium rental rate. And then you can see some of the things that the builder did, like Nick said, that you can't really like do these things in the future. Like instead of just, a straight box for the floor plan, putting in some architectural interest, some alcoves, those sorts of things. Going back to the idea that the person who built this was a luxury home builder, they had that mindset. They came at this from that perspective instead of the perspective of building sort of your traditional like box style apartment units and apartment buildings. A little bit more about how we got the deal. So the current ownership group, the seller, is operationally distressed. They're a very large group. They've acquired about 10,000 units over the last about 3 to 4 years, which is a little too much. So to put that into perspective, our portfolio has about 1,600 units that we've acquired over the last 5 to 7 years. So they came to recognize that they grew too quickly, too much, too quickly, and that they are now operationally underwater. And so their plan is to sell off much of their portfolio, bring their portfolio down to a manageable size that's all geographically constrained so that they can operate those assets very, very well. And they very much wanted a group that would carry on their mission. And so we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation here. This was a very competitive offer process, multiple offers, multiple rounds of highest and best, because it is just such a high quality project in a high quality neighborhood with just lots of upside potential. So there was one other offer at $22 million, and we got this under contract at $20.3 million. So 1.7 million lower than another offer that was on the table. We think of that as like the market showing that there is 1.7 million of instant equity. Like theoretically, we could buy the thing and close and call the person that had offered 22 million and say, would you like to buy it for 22 million? There were many things that went into that. One is our operational excellence. They like that we're vertically integrated with our property management. They like that we're a local group. The second is that we agreed to assume their HUD loan, which is a lengthy, rigorous process. Like we have an attorney who represents us to the government, who takes care of all of the paperwork. Like it is an exhausting process.
It takes 9 months. It's a grueling process.
Yeah, to assume a HUD loan. But that saved them over $1 million in prepayment penalty. And so it made our offer, that's part of why they were willing to take our offer at 1.7 million less, is because about $1 million of that, if they had taken the other offer, would have gone into a prepayment penalty. And then we'll talk in a few slides here about their mission as an affordable housing provider and how we were able to structure a win-win-win deal for that. So that's some of the things that came together that allowed us to basically acquire this asset with about 1.7 million of instant equity the moment we signed the purchase agreement. Very exciting purchase agreement to sign.
Oh, it was good. It was really good. Let's talk about a direct sales comp. So this is Egan Gables Townhomes, and this isn't something that we just kind of grabbed off of sales comp list. We toured this property. We offered on this property, so we're extremely familiar with this property. We've been trying to get an asset in the Egan Apple Valley area for a very long time, writing offer after offer after offer, and we just getting blown out of the water by other offers in that particular market. So it's less than 8 miles away. It's built in 1978. Now, Boulder Ridge built in 2001, so a way newer vintage asset in Boulder Ridge. This is a smaller community. Egan Gables is a smaller community in Boulder Ridge, only 55 townhomes versus 112 at Boulder Ridge. So I would way rather own Boulder Ridge, where you're kind of in that sweet spot where like one site maintenance person, one site management person. You've got really good operational economies of scale. Egan Gables, it's a little too small to support site staff there. Egan Gables even had an assumable HUD loan, just like Boulder Ridge. So these are just such incredibly comparable assets. It's rare to find such direct comps. But here's the thing. Egan Gables sold for $274,000 a unit.
Mm-hmm.
Our per unit purchase price on Boulder Ridge is $181,000 a unit. So you can talk about what's the capitalization rate going in or the exit capitalization rate, or there's lots of ways to manipulate net operating income and stuff. Something that Elaine and I always look at is buying below replacement cost. What is
Mhm.
your price per pound? And we're buying enormous units, 2,000 plus square foot units at an extraordinarily low per unit purchase price. We know exactly what it costs to build these things because we just got done spending 5 years building these things. And it costs you like $300,000 to build one of these units today. So if we're able to buy those units at $181,000 a unit, I think we're doing pretty well.
Mhm.
We can just
Mhm.
drop the mic right there, knowing that we are buying this thing for a couple $1 million less than the next highest offer, and we're buying this for 33% for $10 million less than a direct sales comp. That's like just a shockingly similar sales comp. So if you don't take anything else away from this presentation, it's don't get caught up in complexity, because we're going to talk about some of the complexities of like operational, efficiencies and stuff like that. Just know what something's worth. Be in the marketplace. Be making as many offers as you can, because when that deal of a lifetime comes along, you'll know it the second you see it. We knew it the moment we saw Boulder Ridge.
Absolutely. A little bit more about how we got the deal. This was your deal that you put together, this win-win-win deal, thinking about the psychology of the seller, what their needs were. Right? Anytime there's a seller, of course they want, the best price they can get and the terms and everything, but they tend to have some needs that are outside of those numerical things. And when we can meet those needs, that creates that win-win-win deal that allows everyone to flourish.
Yeah. So this is a situation where just all the stars align. So the seller is a nonprofit. They specialize in affordable housing. Their goal is to purchase assets and to operate those assets to provide affordable housing in the Minneapolis St. Paul area. A very admirable mission, something that we very much admire and practice. The majority of the housing that we provide in the Rochester area meets the affordability standard for our county and for our municipality. And this particular nonprofit group, they've largely operated these assets in the way nonprofits do, which is to say, not very efficiently. Whereas we're very much a for-profit organization, and we're ruthlessly focused on maximizing operational efficiencies. So they got a great deal on this asset when they bought it. Real estate values rose during the time that they own this asset. And then Elaine, in her exposition, mentioned they also bought a lot more assets. And when they first bought this asset, they had really good site management in place, really good site maintenance in place, and they were really controlling their operational expenses. And you can see in their historical financials that over time, as their portfolio grew, those operational expenses just kind of went off the rails. The expenses were going up by hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, because after a while they couldn't maintain their assets with their in-house employees anymore. It just, they had to hire too many people too quickly. So they started vending out their turnovers and construction, and then finally vending out their site maintenance altogether. And now today there's no site maintenance and no site management staff for this particular asset. So when we
This would be like if you went into a restaurant and you thought you were being served at, I don't know, what's a great, like, we took our kids to Texas Roadhouse this week for one of our child's birthday. But inside of Texas Roadhouse, there was like a vendor who managed checking in. There was a different vendor who took care of, say, like the bar, a different vendor who hired all of the wait staff, a different vendor who was managing the kitchen and the actual cooking. Think about all the additional layers of complexity and communication breakdowns and escalation of costs. And of course, all of those vendors exist to create a profit for their business, right? So all of those vendors have a profit margin kind of added on to that. So all of a sudden, say your meal that might cost, I don't know, $20 per person, that you're seated pretty quickly. You have contact with one server. They go back, they, get things out of the kitchen, take care of that. There's multiple different, not just, people involved, but entirely different businesses involved across that supply chain. And anytime there's a breakdown of, let's say the food comes out and it's too cold. Well, is it the responsibility of the business who employs the servers? Is it the responsibility of the business who employs the people in the kitchen? Is it the responsibility of the people checking people in because they're not managing flow through the restaurant? Like, think about how crazy that would be in a restaurant experience. That's what had come to exist at this community, that there were so many layers of vended services that the actual person who was inside of the unit, taking care of the unit, taking care of the resident, was 5 or 6 layers removed from the ownership group. And not only did that create an abysmal customer service experience and huge delays in getting things done, but very little ownership because no one really knew who they reported to or what the actual outcomes were. and then staggering costs because of all of those layers there. We're going to get into that here in a little bit, but I wanted to kind of get into, understanding what it means that they had grown so quickly that they had to hire vendors to hire vendors to hire vendors.
Absolutely. So when we had kind of like a heart to heart with the seller, they expressed how they wanted to find a buyer who could take over this highly distressed asset, which meant they kind of had to sell to like some sort of private equity fund vehicle, which let's be honest, that can be like a pejorative. It conjures up this image of like a Wall Street shark persona that's gonna kick everybody out and jack up the rents as fast as they possibly can, and has frankly little regard for a housing nonprofit. And fortunately, we are a locally owned and operated private equity fund. 5% of our profit goes to charity. We built a school last year. 5% of our profit goes to a staff and profit share. We understand and really admire their mission. There's zero judgment in our hearts for their. I mean, really, in a way, it's like admirable that they grew so fast and then had the presence of mind, the self-awareness to say, gosh, we grew so fast that we actually can't really effectively or efficiently serve our mission right now. So we need to sell some of our assets. So we asked, what is it that you really want from this transaction? And they said, we really want our mission to be furthered. We don't care if we own the asset. We want our mission to continue. And we hammered out this deal where we operate a bunch of properties already that are income restricted, where there's restrictions put in place by the government. There's no such restrictions on this property, but we're going to have like kind of like a one-page document at closing that just says we're going to maintain certain levels of affordability in this community, and spiritually, we're going to take care of your people. We're going to make sure that these people who have called this place home for years, that they have every opportunity to stay, that we do everything to work with them, that we fix the operational challenges that are in place right now. And yes, that's going to come with some rent increases, but modest rent increases compared to what 99% of other groups might pursue. And for the next 3 years, we're going to keep these rents at an affordable level, and we're going to honor your mission to the best of our ability. And that's really what they wanted from this transaction. Getting the top offer price didn't really matter. It mattered finding a group that they knew could close, could assume their HUD loan to defeat that prepayment penalty, but ultimately could carry on with their mission. So a few bullet points here about that income restriction. There's a cap to the rental rate that we'll have that's identical to what other income restricted properties might implement, but there's no actual income restriction. So in this particular area, this is a high income area, and what that means is getting to that rent limit is pretty easy, but finding someone who actually is eligible to live there on an income restriction basis is quite difficult. So in our opinion, this allows us to put really high quality tenants in place at a really affordable rental rate that's going to serve their mission and ultimately allow us to operate this asset the way we would like to operate this asset. Day one, this allows us to escalate rents about 13% on a 1-bed, 19% on a 2-bed, and 11% on a 3-bed. And that's just for base rents. That doesn't include utility bill back, pet rent, anything like that. So there's still plenty of room for us to create additional revenue in this asset, enough that we're very confident we can get to a full cash out refi on this asset in less than 5 years, which is our business plan. And the seller really loves that business plan, by the way, that we're not kind of a shark firm that's trying to quickly flip this asset. And we don't need to raise rents any more than that in order to create massive success here, because we're going to create so much value by reducing expenses.
And to be clear, we're not saying that this is the rental rate escalations that we plan for. This would just be our cap. And so when we looked at this and we're like, oh, market rents right now wouldn't allow us to increase it this much anyway. So we're essentially agreeing to something that meets their psychological needs, as Nick described, while imposing essentially no real market limits on our operations. And so it was just a win-win deal to structure this. And later in the presentation, when we share our financials, we'll talk about the rental increases that we have modeled into our pro forma. Next up is our repair escrow. So one of the interesting parts about HUD financing is that HUD financing requires that you escrow in a certain amount each month for not only like day-to-day maintenance repairs, but larger things like, say, the roofs and those sorts of things. Kind of similar to how when you have a traditional mortgage, you escrow in your property taxes or your insurance. HUD just has another part that they require that groups escrow. This group has grown so quickly that they have failed to make the claims against their escrow. So they're paying into their escrow, and that money is just kind of going into like a vault, and they could be claiming from it each month as they submit maintenance tickets, or say like the roofs that they just repaired or those sorts of things. But they just operationally don't have the capacity to take on that additional administrative burden.
They literally don't have the ability to match up an invoice for where they replace the roofs on this property, get that invoice submitted to HUD, get the reimbursement. There's so many invoices from so many vendors flying around that they're not able to put that paperwork together to claim against the escrow that they're already paying into.
So there's about $2.5 million in that escrow today, and we are purchasing that escrow at closing for $2 million. So we're essentially making $500,000, $500,000 on the day of closing because we're buying a bank account. We're paying $2 million for a bank account that has $2.5 million in it. And then we have the administrative capacity to submit for our day-to-day maintenance, our repairs, our renovations. So as we talk about the plan that we have for some of the light value add physical renovations, we'll be funding those out of this repair escrow. So just to, as Nick and I were putting the slides together, like this slide out of the thousands of slides that Nick and I have put together, like gave me a chuckle of like, I wish I could just purchase $2.5 million bank accounts for 2 million, like every day. Like, where do I sign? Just such an easy way to create $500,000 of value, again, against a purchase price of $20 million. So a really favorable ratio. And that's where we're coming up with the 1.7 million of equity against the other offer that they had in hand. And then the 500,000 of equity that we're creating by acquiring their repair escrow. So it's about 2.2 million of day one equity against a purchase price of 20.3 million. So a little over 10%, about 11% just instant equity created by putting together a win-win-win deal that understood the psychology of the seller, the needs that they have, the specific constraints that they had, and not just focusing on making this a contentious negotiation, but instead making it a collaborative way that we could mutually create value for each other.
We're all about alignment of incentives. So we said, man, that's a really expensive escrow for us to buy. How can we structure this contract to keep our incentives aligned? Because we'd prefer if the escrow wasn't so big and we don't need to, to take your money. So we just said, we will pay 80 cents on the dollar for whatever's left at the day of closing. So the more you can reclaim from that escrow prior to closing, the more money that you make and the less money we need to bring as a down payment. Let's say they were able to pull $1 million at escrow prior to closing. We would love that. And then if you're wondering, how could it be possible that it's like you don't have the operational effectiveness to get reimbursed from the escrow? So I have a hilarious story from literally an hour before this webinar. So we have a similar government loan on Georgetown that we just closed on, and they sent us some paperwork to submit our first escrow draw. And there is $100,000 for like a bunch of big ticket stuff that we're doing. And then there is $67 for a fire extinguisher. And I had to call them to say, what's going on with this fire extinguisher? And they said, oh, well, one of our inspectors noticed that there was a fire extinguisher present in the leasing office that was out of date. It's not an inspected fire extinguisher. It's like one you get from Costco. And I'm like, okay, well, we just removed those. So, it's probably just something that like a tenant, left in their unit and was in that office just that day. That's not like a permanently installed fire extinguisher. And so I'm talking to him on the phone and going back and forth for like 5 minutes. And it was clear that they needed an invoice for the purchase of a fire extinguisher, proof of payment that fire extinguisher has been paid for, and then a cell phone photo indicating that fire extinguisher had been installed in the office. And so I said, okay, so let me get this straight. If I send a member of my team to go buy a fire extinguisher from Costco, take it out of the box, set it on the floor, take a photo of it, and then return it to Costco, you're good. That's what you need to release this $100,000 release of the escrow. And they said, absolutely, that would be no problem at all. And so, like, I hope you appreciate the insanity of that situation of me having to send a member of my team to go purchase a fire extinguisher that shouldn't have been there in the first place and wasn't even actually there in order to get our $100,000 draw. And can you see how an organization that's operationally burdened, you can visualize a phone call of like an accounting team. No. I need you to go buy a fire extinguisher. I know we don't put fire extinguishers. No, I need you to buy one and take a photo, then return it. And just if you're operationally burdened, you can't, you'd struggle to operate in that environment. So we have the wherewithal to send people around to stay compliant with these government loan programs because you have to check that box. There's no flexibility there. I hope you enjoyed that hilarious story. And
I'm just like, this is why I'm married to you. Nick does this like with me, with the kids, with just everyone, just constantly like trying, a question came up, how do you know to look for these Easter eggs? Just constantly asking like, what is the real need here? Like what's the next layer? Why does that need to happen? What are you really looking for? What is your end goal here? Just constantly kind of probing into those questions.
Such a high quality question.
And making enjoyment of it, right? Building relationship out of it, because we're going to be dealing with the person on the other end of this HUD escrow for the next 10-20 years. So getting to understand each other and understand each other's patterns and needs. So that's the HUD escrow. Very excited about being able to acquire this with about 500,000 of equity on day one. Next up, we will talk about the debt. So we just finished the deal part of our how to create life-changing generational wealth, and now we'll move on to the debt.
So this particular asset has a HUD 223F loan. That is a particular type of HUD loan that's considered to be by many the most desirable loan product that you can get. They have the lowest interest rates. This one's at 4.47. They have the longest amortization periods. This is a 35-year amortization. So if you get a loan from like a regional bank, or even a loan on like a conventional loan on a single family home, or a loan from Fannie or Freddie on an apartment building, they only go up to a 30-year amortization. HUD will go up to a 35-year. They'll even go up to a 40-year amortization. You can get LTVs as high as 90% on a HUD loan, and they'll take lower debt service coverage ratios and stuff like that. They offer the most favorable loan terms. And on this particular asset, we have outrageously favorable loan terms. However, there's a but, of course, right? So it's only if you can actually get one, because it's kind of like going to the DMV for 9 months, just setting up a tent and just kind of hanging out in line at the DMV for a solid 9 months. It's a mind-numbing amount
I'm waiting for the email that's like, okay, now we need like your blood samples or your fingerprints or
it's HUD sent me an email. I haven't read it yet because it shows up encrypted through some antiquated system that we can barely access. Technology is not their strong suit. They are very good at managing loans that tend to not go bad. They underwrite the heck out of every single one of their borrowers, and you need to be a large housing provider that's very experienced with a spotless track record before they're willing to give you a loan, which makes sense, right? Because they're kind of aggressive loans, the most favorable terms. So they would never, ever, ever want to issue a loan to someone who's not an incredibly safe operator. They also are very long-term oriented. They give you these 35-year term loans. We're fixed for 35 years on this loan. And they typically have very favorable, prepayment penalty structures, so you don't get stuck. But they don't really like to work with operators that are flippers. They really like to work with buy and hold operators. And they also really like to work with operators that provide affordable housing. So if you are providing affordable housing that is Section 42, Section 8, or is merely just lower rental rate, they give you kind of bonus points for that, and they're more willing to work with you in that regard. So we very much fit their mold, but the vast majority of housing operators do not. So the people that take HUD loans tend to be like nonprofit operators or affordable housing providers. It's not typically like a private equity fund that's getting HUD loans. In this case, again, we bring all the agility and operational acumen and excellence that comes with a private equity fund with the kind of spiritual wholeness of like an affordable housing provider. So we're able, we've been approved to assume this loan, which is no small feat. And we're going through that paperwork right now. We've already shouldered, tens of thousands of dollars in legal costs. There's literally 1,000 pieces of paperwork that you need to submit. They need to see our entire org chart for every single one of our employees. They need to see all of our financials for every single one of our assets and make sure we're not underwater on any of those assets, which is, kind of a not uncommon thing for a lot of operators these days. If you're not a really healthy operator, they don't want to do business with you. And it's far harder to assume a loan than it is to get a new loan, because they're going to compare you to the existing operator. And they're not going to let you assume that loan unless they're more comfortable with you than they are with the existing operator. So it's very difficult to get these loans, but if you can get them, they're extremely favorable loans to get. There was a question there, is what makes HUD loans assumable? So HUD, from their perspective, this is going to sound kind of funny, but this will make sense for you. From HUD's perspective, their mission is to provide affordable housing. And the operator is just one ingredient to that puzzle. Like when you put a HUD loan in place on that asset, they want to see that loan stay in place. They send out asset managers to check on your assets on a routine basis. And if they don't like the way you're operating the asset, they're going to tell you about it. And they're going to use carrots and sticks to make sure that you operate the asset the way you want. So from their perspective, the operator, it can change, but the loan and the asset, they stay the same. Like, think about the vision of that, right? Like, we don't care who owns the asset. We care about the fundamentals of the asset. Is the asset being taken care of? Is the management company and the operator up to our standards? If they are, then it doesn't matter who the operator is. So from that mindset, it makes perfect sense that all those loans would be transferable.
When we got approved to assume this loan, that was like the A student in me. Like this was like the biggest victory. Like we did it, we did it.
It is an academic exercise.
Like getting approved for a regional bank loan or Fannie Freddie, those are big accomplishments. Getting approved for a HUD loan assumption, whole different ball game. Very excited about being able to assume this loan and all of the value that it's going to create for years and years and years to come, and all of the stability that it will create for years and years to come. So that's the deal and the debt. We really think that the deal plus the debt together is what creates the magic in real estate investing. And I hope you're starting to see how we put this together, how we're creating value, how this makes sense as an amazing investment opportunity. Next up, we have operations. This is, the meat of the value in this deal is how do we bring down expenses? How do we bring the income up, and how do we do so in a way that's time efficient so that we can get to increasing the asset value enough so we can get to that cash out refi and get to our infinite rate of return.
So even though there's kind of four pieces to this puzzle, this one is the most important one. It truly is, because we found that you can get like the best deal with the best debt, and then just a little bit of bad operations can submarine that deal in a hurry. And conversely, you can get the worst deal on an asset, get the worst loan on that asset. But if you just operate that asset well, it'll get better. It will do better year after year after year until you've got a phenomenal deal on your hands. So, operations is really, it's the meat of everything. So we're gonna dive in here because there's a lot of ground we could cover on operations.
Yeah, so what we're going to do here is go over kind of our holistic operational plan, and then we have detailed examples for 3 of them. We could have gone into detailed examples for all of them, but that would have taken like another hour in the presentation. But you'll see some patterns here about bringing things in-house, removing multiple layers of redundant services, redundant vended management, thinking about increasing the quality and the resident experience while decreasing the cost as much as possible. So overall, these are the things that we have planned for starting to implement these things immediately after closing. Right now, there's no site manager. This group essentially, they're so operationally stretched thin that they were unable to replace the site manager. They did have a site manager in place, and then that person left for some personal reasons, and they're unable to hire another site manager. Well, you can imagine how a community is flourishing when it's this size and there's no site manager. So first, we're going to staff it. We have the person who will staff this site already as part of our Black Swan team. They're here with us in Rochester, soaking up our culture, building relationships and alliances with like our core operations, like our leasing team, our accounting team, our move-in, move-out team, all of those things, so that that person carries the excellence of our portfolio to this site while they're backed by all of the back office things that we have here in Rochester to keep things very efficient. They also have no site maintenance person. So they're vending out everything. And there's a lot of like, if you can fix it in-house, it's like $5, like tightening a knob on a faucet or a wobbly cabinet door or replacing a battery in a smoke detector. I mean, you can think on and on and on of all of these little, sort of like honeydew things that if you're vending those out, that can add up to staggering expenses. And then conversely, when things do become expensive, when there is, a real water leak or something like that, if that's not tended to very quickly, it goes from something like, well, we can repair, the valve in the shower for a few $100s tomorrow, or we have to tear out the shower and the sheetrock and do some restoration for mold prevention and then repair all of that and then repair the shower valve 3 weeks later. And the price just, escalates drastically. So those 2 things alone will save us about $375,000 per year. Right now, they're vending out their turns. So when one person moves out before the next person moves in, they're vending those out. That's a very expensive thing to vend out. A lot of that service is things like cleaning and painting, that when you bring those in-house, you're able to get those services at a much lower cost. We do all of our turns in-house across our entire portfolio. So that'll save us about $100,000 per year. Same thing for cleaning. We're going to bring that in-house. We brought cleaning in-house into the overall Black Swan portfolio about 2 years ago and have had phenomenal success with it in terms of our residents being happy, having good documentation for the cleanliness of our common areas, the cleanliness of a unit when a new resident moves in. Residents are much happier with the cleanliness of the communities as a whole. That will save about $130,000 per year. Lawn and snow. We're going to bring that in-house. Nick loves to talk about lawn and snow, as you guys know. And if you're new to us, you will come to know that very soon. So there's a whole slide on lawn and snow. That'll save us about $10,000 to $30,000 per year. And then they're not marketing. So because they're so operationally constrained, they're just choosing not to market. We have a very robust marketing department. We focus a lot on multiple different types of high quality media, Matterport tours, drone footage, individual websites for all of our communities, marketing on all of the different platforms like Zillow, apartments.com, others like that. And that increases the lead pool of potential residents, which then not only increases the potential rental rates that you're able to get, but decreases vacancy. And so this will increase the income by about $300,000 per year. So you can see there how we kind of went through all of the main service things that have to happen in a multifamily community, kind of going back to my example of if you were at a restaurant, right? What are all the things that have to happen for you to be able to walk into a restaurant and then walk out as a happy, satisfied customer? So these are the things that need to happen in a multifamily community and the value that we'll be bringing to the asset by improving the operational standards to the standards that we have in our portfolio. And then we're going to dive into a couple of very detailed examples here.
You might be wondering, how could this be possible? Why would a property management company, why would an operator not have a site manager, not have a site maintenance person? Why would they choose to operate very inefficiently? Why would they choose not to market the asset? And it's very important to understand the mindset of whoever you're trying to serve, whoever you're trying to do business with. So think about this from the perspective of an affordable housing provider. Well, if we just keep rents low, then no one will ever leave, which means we don't have to do a lot of turnovers, which means we probably don't need to have staff dedicated to that function. And if we keep rents low and we don't have to lease a lot of units, then we can save money on marketing. And that's a cost savings that allows us to keep rents low and further our mission as an affordable housing provider. And if we keep rents low, the tenants are probably not going to complain about problems very much. So we might not need to fully staff that site. Like, customer service doesn't necessarily have to be a virtue of ours, as long as we're providing, clean, safe, affordable housing. So we can scale back that site management cost, and that's going to allow us to provide more affordable housing. And if we keep rents low, then people probably are going to not report as many maintenance tickets, and maybe they'll take care of a few things on their own. And that might allow us to scale back on site maintenance. And we can vend all these things out for what needs we do have. And you can see how it could make sense for someone to put together a business plan where their goal is to really reduce services and expenses to the tenants as much as they can. And the trade-off for that is that rents are a little bit lower, and it could make sense from a financial perspective or from a mission perspective to do that. The unfortunate fact is that when you lean into that model in the housing business, you get into kind of a downward spiral. So like when we were visiting the site, we were unable to enter countless units because no one knew how to enter the unit. No one knew what key to get into the unit, or who lived in that unit, or how to contact that person, because they didn't have that site manager and that site maintenance person. So I would think entering the unit would be just about the most basic operational task that you could perform on an asset. But when you don't have that hands-on support, things actually deteriorate like far further or faster than you might ordinarily expect. And on a different site visit when we were there, a vendor was unloading like 50 toilets from a van, and I asked the regional manager who was there with us at the site, why are you guys doing like a water savings plan or something like that? Why is someone like, it's kind of weird, right, for someone to just pull up and unload 50 toilets? And the site manager said, well, that does seem kind of strange. I'm not sure what they're doing here or why they're unloading those toilets. And I said, well, that seems strange that someone would be unloading 50 toilets. You wouldn't know why. How did that come to be? And they said, well, I bet we are probably doing like a water conservation plan at one of our other sites. And we probably hired a vendor to do that, and then that vendor was overloaded because we've grown so quickly. So that vendor then subcontracted that out to another vendor, and then that vendor got overloaded, so they subcontracted it out to another vendor, and now that vendor just has it mixed up which asset they're supposed to go to in order to do the water conservation plan. So okay, so you should probably tell them to load the toilets back up, and they're like, well, I don't really have the authority to do that because I don't know who's hired them or what paperwork they have or anything like that. So we watch them just unload these toilets and just leave them sitting in the parking lot. And at some point, days or weeks later, someone would figure out that they unloaded them at the wrong site, pick them up. Hopefully it didn't rain or something like that, reload them on the truck and take them to the correct site. So those are the sort of operational efficiencies that manifest themselves very quickly when you have a low service approach to affordable housing. So we are an affordable housing provider. We have an extraordinarily high service approach. And we think that when you have high expectations for your tenants and you serve them at the highest level while keeping rents low, it can be not just the right thing to do, but also the profitable thing to do. And you'll see that in our projections for this site. So I just wanted to mention that because when you see that list looks crazy. And you must be wondering how the heck could that come to be? And that's the mindset. And it's not an uncommon mindset to see in the industry. So taking a deep dive here into one of these challenge points here. So unit turnover is being performed by vendors. Why is that such a big problem? This is actually a pretty common thing to encounter in the industry. It can be overwhelming to your site maintenance person to go replace flooring, to go repaint an entire unit, something like that. In this case, though, where you have a subcontractor hiring a subcontractor, you end up with quality that's very poor. We actually asked them to stop doing unit turns because the quality was so poor. We were going to have to go remediate these units. And you imagine all these different subcontractors not really talking to each other. So they're kind of stepping on each other's shows, literally or figuratively. That results in cost overruns that one way or another, you end up paying for as an asset. And timeline really goes out the window. So you really need to turn that unit in order to show it. Or worse, you could maybe lease it sight unseen and you're told that it's going to be done 30, 60, 90 days from now. That person goes to move in and it's not ready. And now you have an upset tenant with no place to live. So all of our turnovers are performed by our W-2 employees. We do augment that with vendors if we're overloaded and it's a high turnover period. So we might bring in a flooring contractor or a paint contractor, but our W-2 employees are the people swinging hammers in every single one of our unit turnovers so that the staff person, the W-2 staff person that we have the privilege to lead, they can strangle that subcontractor, that flooring installer, or that painter and say, "Hey, why aren't you here today?" Or "Why did you drip paint onto my brand new flooring? You need to come back and clean that up." And when you don't have that person who's investing the asset, that full-time staff person, you lose that ownership and your outcomes go out the window. So just to quantify this, we're certain that we can reduce our turnover times from 3 months to 1 week. From 3 months to 1 week. I know that sounds crazy, but I spent a painful amount of time illustrating how crazy the situation is now and how it got there, so you can understand how we can affect such a massive improvement in that asset today. We know we can cut costs in half, at least in half. So assuming 20 turnovers per year, which is a low assumption for a community this size, and just a $5,000 per unit savings in per turnover cost, which I think is a conservative assumption, we would save over $100,000 a year just by leveraging our in-house staff members. My math isn't quite right there. There'd be 2 million at a 5% capitalization rate, but just a huge impact on the net operating income and the value of the asset.
Very similar to that is site maintenance as a whole. So I gave the example of how there's a lot of things that aren't very expensive if you're sending, one maintenance person to kind of go around the community and take care of those little things. But then conversely, things that could be inexpensive can become very expensive if they're not handled in a timely fashion, and that problem escalates and kind of percolates throughout the unit. So we will have full-time dedicated site maintenance as one of our employees. Improves customer service, response time, quality, cost. One thing that is hard to capture with vended services is institutional knowledge of, well, this is how these systems work, or, those faucets tend to have, this particular thing about them, or you learn things about maintaining a building, right? Just like as a physician, like you learn things about your patients and maybe how they respond to medications or the improvements that they're having in the hospital. It's kind of the same thing by having dedicated site maintenance. So our plan is to reduce the current maintenance expenses from about $550,000 down to $175,000. To be clear, the current number of $550,000 is astronomical. That is outside of the norm of what would be seen, if you surveyed 20 communities of this size across the country because of all of these layers of redundancy. So our plan to reduce it is to, bring it in-house, to reduce all of those third-party, well, not all of them, but many of those third-party vendors, reduce all of that complexity, and then bring our maintenance expenses down to about 175,000. And that's benchmark off of our other similar townhome communities that are similar size and similar age. And then I think we have two more specific examples for populations.
I'm gonna speak to lawn and snow. Do you want me to speak to marketing too, or do you
Oh,
want to
I'll do marketing so that you can do lawn and snow. So right now there's very poor marketing, right? You can imagine the psychology of someone who is failing to be able to submit receipts to their HUD escrow in order to get money out of their escrow. Marketing's probably not very high on their to-do list. There's no site manager, so things like lease showings and getting applications approved is a very long timeline for those things to happen. That results in a lower lead funnel for potential residents, right? Which then results in less demand, which then results in lower rents, right? Just like anything that you are selling, if you have a shop and you have very few customers that are coming in, you're going to have to be much more aggressive on price versus if you have a shop and you have lots of potential customers that are coming in, you can optimize your pricing as much as possible. We're very excited about our marketing, what we're able to do with all of our media, with our Matterport, our drone, our 3D floor plans, all of those things, getting that out to as many portals as possible, doing organic social media based marketing. That all then leads to more tenant inquiries, which leads to more showings, leads to more applications, and that allows us to optimize our rental rates as much as possible with the highest quality tenants, because we can be, at the top of our screening criteria and fill up our communities. We estimate that this will have a financial impact of about $200 per unit per month for the rental rate, because we have more leads coming in. And then overall, this will be about $323,000 per year of an increase in net operating income, all from marketing, right? Like there's only two things that any business can do: innovation and marketing. Operations is talking about how we're going to innovate so that we can serve our clients at the highest level at the most efficient costs. And then we just talked about marketing and why it's so very important.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about,
let's let Nick have his moment about lawn and snow.
Yeah. So the vast majority of apartment communities, they vend out lawn and snow services. It's really brutally difficult work in the freezing cold or in the hot sun. It's dirty work, and it's difficult to find the people to operate the equipment. The equipment's expensive. This is something that we've vertically integrated, and we've had massive success. So not this summer, but last summer, we had as much as 90% cost savings on lawn care for many of our properties, because it was a hot summer and we didn't need to mow very much. Mm-hmm. It was a hot, dry summer, so we didn't need to mow very much. And when you vend these things out, the vendor has zero incentive to optimize your costs. In fact, they probably have a huge incentive to charge you as much as they can. They are going to send their people out to mow the lawn, regardless of whether or not the lawn needs to be mowed. And in this case, we project savings of 10 to 30,000 a year. I suspect the savings could be higher than that. This is a conservative assumption. We need to get the equipment in place and just see what it's like to operate that equipment. But their current expenditure is quite high, and we're doing that with I think a pretty clever solution. So on the left here, we've got a map of the Boulder Ridge campus, and you can see on the left side of that photo, there's this huge tree line. This whole community is surrounded by a huge number of trees. It's beautiful, and there's an up elevation to go into that wooded area. You can see that it's a pretty high density campus. It has huge, beautiful green belts, but there's not a lot of great places to push the snow. And most people, they push the snow with a plow truck. Mm-hmm. So this is I promise you that what the current vendor is doing is they're just bringing a plow truck. They're not clearing any walkways or side areas or anything like that. They'll push the snow into corners and stuff like that, obstructing parking spaces. And then when there's too much snowfall, when we get 12, 18-inch snowfalls, as we sometimes do here in Minnesota, they then have to haul the snow out. So they have to bring out a front end loader, dump that snow into a dump truck. The dump truck has to haul it to the snow dump. It is,
and it's really bad for the environment.
Yeah, it's unreal. So what we have as a complete 180-degree turn from the strategy is on the right is a beautiful John Deere rig that we inherited with Georgetown, which is also owned in Fund 4. And we don't need that rig at Georgetown because we have other rigs in the Rochester area, lawn and snow rigs. So you can see that there's an enormous snow blower. So this snow blower on the front of that tractor is like many times the size of a normal like push behind self-propelled snow blower. It's got like a 4 foot wide front end to it, and it can throw that snow 30, 40 feet, and it can throw that snow uphill and into a wooded area, right? The snow will kind of like it disperse itself amongst the trees as you're throwing snow. So what that means is we can push the snow around where we need to, or we can throw that snow into like the wooded areas that are kind of in a perimeter around on the community, especially on that west side. That means we'll never have to haul out snow. We'll never have to pay a vendor to get in their truck. We literally can just have our site maintenance person or our site manager even just drive around with this big old snow blowing tractor, and they'll be able to get the community completely clean. No parking spaces will be obstructed. No cars will be damaged from pushing snow around, and we'll do it for a fraction of the cost. And then it's a similar thing with the lawn side. We just put a mower deck on that rig in the summer. We changed it out in the spring and fall. We can use all the expertise from our Rochester team to maintain and manage that equipment. And we literally just need our site maintenance or management person to just go drive around when the snow falls, and that's it. And it allows us to save staggering amounts of money on these expenses.
So that's a glimpse into how we're going to approve the operations of this community. This is really where the meat of this deal is. So as we're going through our 4-step plan for how to create life-changing generational wealth, we've talked about the deal, we talked about the debt, talked a lot about operations, and now we're going to talk about increasing the asset value. And some of the questions came in about, how would we do a cash out refi with a HUD loan and those sorts of things. So we'll address that during this part, because as you increase that asset value, you want to be able to harvest that equity so you can return capital and then invest that in the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. That's called increasing the velocity of capital. And that's kind of our number one mission at Black Swan Real Estate in terms of our helping our investors, is to help you take one bucket of capital, invest it in something, get a full return of capital in about 5 years or less, and then you have that capital to use for the next thing, to invest with the next deal or different deal, or put in the stock market, whatever it is, so that you have multiple streams of passive income coming in from that one original bucket of capital. So let's talk about our plan for increasing the asset value.
So if the first mic drop moment was that we're buying this for 33% less than another asset that we recently offered on that closed while interest rates were high, this is the second mic drop moment. So you saw some of those completely absurd numbers, reducing maintenance expense by $375,000 on one line item, increasing rents, mostly expense reduction. This adds up to an increase of NOI by over $1 million. And you can see we've got like the 2023 financials. These are the in-place financials from the seller. And you can see that they are running negative $500,000 in cash flow. So that's why they have to sell this asset, because this is a negative cash flow asset with the operational inefficiencies that are in place at this time. We're going to inherit their debt service, right? So we need to increase NOI enough that's at least cash flow positive. And we know that we're going to be able to bump NOI as much as $800,000 just on day one, without renovating anything, just with curing these like really challenging operational inefficiencies. And then in the future, as we slowly and considerately raise rents, we are very confident that we can push income from 2.15 million to 2.4 million. These are, I think, extremely conservative targets for this asset, because the in-place rents are just so low on it compared to other properties. And that gets us to 1.4 million in NOI from an in-place NOI of just 313,000. I gotta be honest, I've never seen a deal that has this kind of spread on it, where you're taking NOI from 300K to 1.4 million, particularly at the day of closing. So we see just an extraordinary amount of opportunity to create wealth here. And if you want to think about what this might be worth in the future, at a 5% cap rate on a $1.4 million amount of NOI, that would be $28 million, or about $8 million than we're paying for the asset. And you could also think about that on a per unit basis. That would still be cheaper than Ian Gables in that comparable sale by $20,000 a unit. So I think that we have very conservative projections. I could very easily see this asset being worth more than $30 million. We're just trying to do some very conservative math here. Who knows where this asset could be 5-10 years from now? There's just such a limitless runway for this particular asset. So when you add up all those operational improvements, this is it. This is how you create $8 million of value almost on day one. just by having the tenacity to go after this deal, to create massive value for the seller with a win-win deal, to go through the arduous, standing at the DMV for 9 months process of assuming that HUD loan, and then having the grit, the tenacity, to improve the operations of the asset and ultimately create massive value, not just on day one, not just on the day of closing, but for years in the forward future.
And speak a little bit about our cash out refi plan with our HUD loan.
Yeah, great question. So there was a couple questions there. One was, would HUD allow I was Canadian for a second there. Would HUD allow cash out refinance? So there's a supplemental loan product in like Fannie and Freddie loans, which we will leverage at Georgetown. HUD does have a supplemental option on a 223F loan, but it tends to be for like energy efficiency upgrades, or if you kind of find yourself stuck, like let's say you need to replace all your roofs or something like that, they will give you a supplemental loan to make material improvements to the asset. Or let's say we wanted to add, I mentioned we could add like structures, they'll give you a supplementary loan for that. Because again, HUD sees their mission as supporting the asset, right? They could care less about you. So if you are putting that money straight into the asset, they will give you a supplementary loan for that. That's a very favorable loan, but they don't want to give you that money to put in your pocket, whereas Fannie and Freddie will. In terms of cash out refinance, so there's a step down prepayment penalty on HUD loans that's very favorable. It's a 10-year step down prepayment penalty. So if you were to prepay that loan in year one, there'd be a 10% prepay penalty. If you were to prepay that loan in year two, there'd be a 9% prepayment penalty. And then 7654321. So that if you prepaid that loan in year 10, because remember it's a 35-year loan, then there's no prepayment penalty whatsoever. Well, this loan has been running for several years already. So we're coming in, around year 3 or 4 of this particular loan, which means that if we were to do a cash out refinance in year 4, we might be facing like a 2% prepayment penalty, a very, very manageable prepayment penalty. If you were to compare that with like a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac loan, those prepayment penalties can be many times higher than that. It makes a cash out refinance, almost unworkable, because those prepayment penalties can be so high. So a really favorable prepayment penalty structure on this particular loan that is in perfect alignment with our business plan. So those first 3 years, we're going to keep rents artificially low while we really ratchet down efficiencies and make the asset beautiful, but we're not doing any like deep value adds or anything like that. And then by the time we get to year 4, year 5, that's when we'd have an opportunity to significantly increase rents if we wanted to, if we needed to. Although those projections that you saw that are on the screen right now, that's still staying well within those affordability requirements. And this set of economics would easily get us to a full cash out refi if we were to say hypothetically go get a new HUD loan with that $1.4 million NOI figure. So there's multiple opportunities to refinance this thing in the future. Let's say we wanted to refinance it in year 3. We'd be looking at like a 3% prepayment penalty, still quite reasonable, especially given that it's likely interest rates will be significantly lower 3 years from now. We're not counting on that. In fact, we've got fixed rate debt for 33 years, so we're set for the long term. But there's a huge number of opportunities to get a cash out refi on this deal with this structure.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about our track record, right? So how do we have the ability to make the projections about how we believe we can operate this asset? Let's talk about Douglas Trail Townhome. So we acquired this in November of 2022. This is owned by Fund 2. We paid $11 million. This is 100 townhomes. It has the exact same affordability housing plan as is proposed at Boulder Ridge, and it was in deep operational distress. So it really is like a brother sister asset to Boulder Ridge. Some of the things that were very operationally challenging at Douglas Trail is that half of the residents had some amount of rent in arrears because of lack of good site management, because of lack of good regional management, kind of the same picture that you're seeing at Boulder Ridge. Deep violation of city code, in danger of losing its rental license because of things like the roofs, the driveways, the foundations. We got all of that cleaned up. We actually were able to negotiate all new roofs on this community during the contract period, same as Boulder Ridge. And then we came in and we took care of all of those outstanding maintenance issues that needed to be handled at Douglas Trail. We did a lot of exterior renovations, interior renovations. You can see the units are pretty similar in terms of vintage. This community was also built in the early 2000s. And we have completely turned this property around. We actually have renamed it Dakota to memorialize our rebranding that has happened there. But many of you who have invested in Fund 2 know it as Douglas Trail. So that's why we're using its former name here. Every roof has been replaced across all 100 townhomes. 90% of the units have been extensively renovated with flooring, paint, light fixtures, windows, all of the things that you need to bring this community up to the standard. Lots of exterior renovations on foundations, driveways, those sorts of things. We put in-home laundry in every single unit. That's an amenity that's, it is quickly becoming non-optional in the marketplace. People don't want to have shared laundry, even if it's, if there's plentiful, on-site laundromat. People really want that in-home laundry. So we went through the rigorous process of all of the plumbing and electrical permits and everything that's needed to put in-unit washer dryers in every single unit. Did a lot of work to the common areas, removed probably 50 dead trees, ground down those stumps, everything that was needed to bring this community up to a nice, safe, clean, good feeling as you're driving around. We put about 1.7 million of capital improvements into this project. Today, the entire community is paying. People are happy. We've escalated the rents in line with that area median income, drastically reduced our operational expenses while making it a much nicer place to live. Our rent roll has increased 29% since time of closing, which was just about 2 years ago. We acquired it in November of 2022. Yeah. So our NOI when we acquired Douglas Trail Townhomes was $542,000. It's a little bit of a specious number because half of the rent roll wasn't paying.
No, that was just based on like T12 rent collections. So rent collections were deteriorating. So I would say that was an optimistic number.
That's what I was saying. It was a very optimistic number.
Yeah.
Probably more like 500.
Like T1 NOI was probably like 0.
Yeah, it was very operationally challenged. And today our NOI is $1 million per year. So we've increased the value of Douglas Trail Townhomes by about $5 million. We're in the process right now of working with the bank. We just walked the banker through last
Friday,
to start the conversation for a cash out refi on Douglas Trail. Now these things take time. A cash out refi can easily take 9 to 12 months. The bank wants to see that NOI gets seasoned. They want to see that those operational improvements stay in place. But we're starting that conversation by walking the banker through. And so you can.
They ordered the appraisal, so I'm optimistic.
That's exciting.
We'll see what they say.
That's really exciting. Yeah. So you can see how when we spotted Boulder Ridge, we had been shopping in that market for a long time. We had offered on Egan Gables, which was that directly comparable asset just a few miles down the road, townhomes, assumable HUD, financing, drastically higher price, 25 years older. We knew the story of an asset that had become incredibly operationally challenged. I'd say probably 40% of the assets that we acquire have some type of deep operational challenges. And then the other 60%, it's more on that physical renovation side. And again, it's always, some combination of both. But if I had to, put them into one bucket or another, that's kind of the ratio. So we recognized this pattern and we said, we've done this before. We know we can do it again. Let's get this thing under contract at an amazing price, have a lot of day one equity with really safe, stable financing that allows us to exercise our cash out refi plan, improve our operations the same way we did with Douglas Trail and all of the other assets in our portfolio that we've been self-managing all the way back to the beginning, back to 2011. We've never had third-party management. And then this is the clear plan to increase our asset value by about $8 million over the next several years. So about a 30% increase in the asset value over the next several years that allows us to get to that cash out refi, get to that infinite rate of return, hold this forever, continue to benefit from more cash flow, more debt pay down. Maybe we do future rounds of renovation, more market appreciation, hanging on to all of those tax advantages. It's the plan that we've done hundreds of times now. And Boulder Ridge just happens to be some big numbers because it's so operationally distressed against a large asset size. So there's lots of room to create $8 million of asset value. We're super excited.
We're super excited.
It's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about how Fund 4 works. If you've not heard of our fund structure, you need a refresher there. We'll wrap up here with talking about how Fund 4 works. And if you'd like to invest in Boulder Ridge, you can do so at blackswanfund4.com.
Saw a couple people have submitted forms already, so we're excited to see that. So we have a very simple investment thesis. If you just buy good assets in a good location and take good care of them, you're probably going to do well. We believe in getting stable debt, fixed rate debt, adding value to those assets. Target an indefinite hold period. Warren Buffett would tell you that all of your worst investment decisions are typically made with a short-term hold in mind. Like, oh yeah, we're just going to flip this thing in a year. Kind of wince about the idea of holding it for a while. But he says if the market were to shut down for a decade, you'd be happy to hold it. That means you're buying right, and that's very much how we feel. And maximizing velocity of capital, so turning over that capital as quickly as we possibly can. And this is kind of the opposite of like a typical private equity mindset, which is really geared towards a quick flip. A 2-year hold period to synthetically maximize IRR or something like that. We want to buy assets where we're going to be proud to hold those assets 50 years from now. And if you do that, you're going to buy the right assets and you're going to make the right operational decisions. If you were to invest in a Black Swan today, there's a couple infographics for you there. But it's really simple. You put money into the bucket, into Fund 4. We use that to go buy assets. Fund 4 is in a really good spot right this second because most of the assets have already been picked out. Most of the capital's already been raised in place, and we've just got 2 to 3 million of space left in that fund. So you're kind of getting in at the end when it's you have the most certainty about what assets are going to be in the fund and where your capital is going to go. So once we're done deploying that capital, we improve the value of the assets exactly as we just spent the last hour talking about, and then it gets us to a cash out refi. That's how you get a full return of your capital, and then you stay in the deal forever thereafter. So we don't have any fees. There's no acquisition fee or asset management fee or capital event fee or disposition fee or marketing promotion fee. We don't get any profit from the deal until you get a full return of capital. And it's a 50-50 split after that. Very simple model that we've used countless times when we were buying single family homes and then doing joint venture partnerships on individual apartment buildings. And then eventually we just did this private equity fund thing and said, why would we ever make this more complicated? Why? Like, this simple model has served us so well. Our investors love it so much. Why would we ever go the way of fees? So if you were to put 100 grand in today, that first year, 2 years, maybe you're not getting much out of it. And then when we get to year 3, 4, we're generating a pretty significant amount of cash flow because we've, gotten to stabilization on those assets, but maybe not done a cash out refi yet. Then, you're getting to, year 4, year 5, you might see pretty significant, distributions in those years, 50% plus as we hit cash out refinances on the majority of those assets. And when you get to year 5, you've gotten all your money back, but you're still in that deal forever. You own 50% of that deal forever. So like Douglas Trail townhomes, if we're able to hit a cash out refinance on that asset here in the near future, which I think we might be able to, that would manifest itself as a multi-million-dollar distribution to our investors. They get 100% of that distribution, and they continue to get 100% of those distributions until they get a full return of capital, and then a 50-50 split after that. That's pretty much it. It's incredibly simple. If that sounds interesting to you in a time of frankly of uncertainty, a time when a lot of operators have struggled, as we said at the top of the show, we're very proud of the fact that we have a pretty large portfolio. We've been doing this for a while, and we've never lost money on a real estate deal. We've never had a capital call, and our legacy deals are still issuing distributions on schedule, which is it's kind of rare in the marketplace today, and just goes to show how conservative we are in all that we do. Hope you bear with me for a few minutes of infomercial at the end, but we hope that you've gotten a lot of value out of this, seeing how the lens that we use to look at deals, it's different than how a lot of people look at deals. We want to be able to create massive value. We've got some time here. Happy to answer any questions that you have. I saw
I think we have a couple of questions
raised
here.
her hand earlier, and we've got some questions here.
All right. So I've crossed off the questions that we've already answered that we, wove in throughout the presentation. So we have a couple of left here. If you have any questions, be sure to pop those into chat now. We'll make sure we get to those. The first thing I see here as I, glance my eye over the chat is the recording. Yes. So the recording will go out at some point tomorrow, probably early afternoon after it formats and everything through YouTube. We'll get that out to our email distribution list.
Yeah. So are you close to close? How close are you to closing? Any barriers? Whew. So HUD loans are fun. We could have closed on this a long time ago with a Fannie, Freddie, or regional bank loan. But HUD loans, settle in. They take 6 to 9 months, sometimes longer, to close, and loan assumptions can be even more complex because there's multiple actors in that dance there. Right now, we're targeting a mid-December closing date. It's possible we could close sooner than that. It's possible that we could close later than that. It's difficult to say. There's been multiple factors kind of outside of our control, systems outages or impairments with HUD, and just a lot of load on their system because a lot of people are seeking HUD loans right now because they're such stable, desirable HUD loans. So everyone was getting these variable rate bridge loans a few years ago. Now everyone wants HUD loans, and so they're even slower than usual. But so far, everything has moved forward just fine. There's a bunch of approvals that we had to get. We've obtained all those approvals. So as far as we can tell, I'm not going to say it's like smooth sailing. Almost certainly boring, rough sailing ahead. But I see no reason why we would not be able to close on this asset at some point here in the next few months. Yeah, excellent question.
Very good. For metrics, what is your stabilized expense ratio, stabilized yield on cost, and exit cap, refi cap at what timelines?
Great question. So our stabilized expense ratio on this asset's about 45%. I'd have to pull up our spreadsheets and stuff like that to track that, which is kind of par for us. That's a lower expense ratio than a lot of groups might have on an asset like this. This is, you might see a low expense ratio like that on like a brand new, kind of class A asset, but a B class 20, 25-year-old asset like this, you don't typically see an expense ratio that low. We're very confident we're able to keep expenses that tight because that's what we're able to do on our other properties. In fact, I was just meeting with our maintenance team today because we so rigorously track how many dollars per door we spend on maintenance on every single asset in the portfolio, how many dollars per month per unit we spend on gas, on water, on electricity. So these are expenses that we have a very firm grip on that we're ruthless in tracking. Exit cap slash refi cap value estimates and on what timelines. So we don't have a reversion cap rate in our model because we don't target a sale. However, we did say that with our $1.4 million NOI estimate at a 5% capitalization rate, the asset might be worth about $28 million. So you could say that 5% is our reversion cap rate, which I think would be a very conservative cap rate to project for an asset of this type at this point in the future. That cap rate today is probably more like 6% because interest rates are so high, but pretty much everyone expects interest rates to be materially lower. Fed's already started to cut rates. We don't need the rates to come down. And this is like a really fun distinction. We actually don't even care what the cap rate is. We actually don't even care what the asset is worth. What we really need to do is we need to look at, will we generate an amount of NOI in the future that would support loan proceeds to get a full return of capital to our investors? I'm going to say that a second time because this is a really critical distinction. A lot of syndicators, fund managers, they can kind of tinker with like reversion cap rate and, oh, well, if we can sell this thing at a 4 cap instead of a 5 cap, well, then it's worth like $35 million. Look, we're geniuses. It's much more predictable to say what sort of net operating income you might have in the future. I think we have a really conservative net operating income estimate. And you asked at what year. So I would say in year 3, our net operating income estimate is 1.4 million. And we are extremely confident we can take it there, which I know sounds bold given that it's at 300,000 in net operating income today, but we're going to get to 800 candidate at closing. I'm very confident we can get to 1.4 million. Or I'm sorry, is one. I flipped those numbers, so it was, maybe we should even pull that chart back up here.
You had it.
A good visual there.
You had it. 300,000
Good.
right now and 1.4 million
Good.
in
Yeah,
3 years.
yeah, 80. Okay, perfect. So that seems like a big spread, but it's actually, I think, quite conservative given the scope of the operational efficiencies that we're able to add here. So again, just to hammer on this point, we actually don't care what the reversion cap rate is. We don't like that's not something that we look at all. We kind of mention that here because I think people want to know, well, how much is the asset worth? But all we need to do is say, let's say that interest rates are the same today as they are 3-5 years from now. So we're not going to expect that they go down. Would we be able to get a loan that would be big enough to get a full cash out refi for our investors? Now that's some really easy math to make. You just plug a few numbers into an amortization calculator, into a loan payment calculator, but you do it backwards. So you start with a loan payment that's a 20% lower than your net operating income of 1.4 million to have a 1.2 debt service coverage ratio. Now, on this asset, HUD, for example, they would go lower than 1.2. So we have some conservative assumptions there. And that gets us to a total loan proceeds level. It gets us a full cash out refi. So it's like a really it's like 1% of the complexity of trying to calculate like a reversion cap rate sale scenario or something like that. So I hope that answered. Those are some sophisticated questions. I really appreciate those questions. I would say we don't typically uh, dive too deep into those types of questions because I find that our audience appreciates a really simple approach. But I love geeking out on more sophisticated topics like that, and hope that that answers your question.
Very good
Excellent
questions.
questions.
One of the questions is, what are risks or disadvantages regarding these types of deals? So as with any type of investment, whether it's real estate or crypto or gold or the stock market or those sorts of things, there's always, potential risk of loss of capital, risk that whoever's operating, that thing, whether it's you're investing in Apple and you're, confident in their board and their CEO, or Black Swan and you're confident in our plan, that we fail to hit our operational targets. There's things like natural disasters that could cause, catastrophic problems with the asset. Of course, there's, mitigation there with insurance, but that is a risk. That's a big part of the reason we're in the Midwest, is we tend to have fairly stable weather. We tend not to have natural disasters, and then we tend to have lower insurance costs because of that as well. There's regulatory risks around, anything from the local level to the state level, the federal level. Who knows what might kind of happen with, based on who's elected, and not just this election, but, if we intend to hold this thing for 20 or 25 years, there will be many regulatory changes over those decades. Those are kind of the big ones that I would think of.
Yeah.
Investing does have risk, right? That's why there's upside in investing, is because there's risk there too. I hope as you are listening to the presentation, you see how we've thought about minimizing the risk as much as we go along. So buying something with day one equity, acquiring something with fixed rate debt so that we've completely eliminated that variable, having multiple plans for increasing the income and decreasing the expenses, so that if even one of those plans doesn't come to fruition, there's lots of other ways that we can hit our targets. Having this in a private equity fund structure so that there's several other assets in that overall fund lends some mini diversification right inside of the fund. Excellent question to ask. Investing, does always have risk. As Nick mentioned, we've never failed to make money on a real estate deal. We've never had a capital call. We've never lost any investor capital, and we've always made our projected distributions. Very good question. Another very good question is, what are the tax advantages in this kind of investment? So that's a lengthy question. I'll try to, kind of ratchet it down to 3 or 4 minutes. So one of the main benefits of investing in real estate is that the IRS incentivizes real estate investments by allowing people to take what's called depreciation. So in the eyes of the IRS, an asset decreases in value over time, even though that's not really how it works in the marketplace. You can think of the IRS kind of thinks that you build a structure, you never turn on any of the utilities, no one ever moves in, you just sort of walk away. And then when you come back 30 years later, what's the value of that structure? That's what depreciation is. And then there's things in the tax code right now called bonus and accelerated depreciation that allow you to capture a lot of that depreciation in year one. So we do all of those tax maneuvers to generate as much paper losses as possible. So on the K-1 tax form, you'll have a negative number that goes out, and it'll be a rather large negative number in the early years as we're pushing out bonus and accelerated depreciation. Of course, the renovations themselves are generating paper losses. If you have other passive income, you can use your passive losses to offset that passive income. If you don't have other sources of passive income, you carry that forward on your tax return every year. During the years when we're doing return of capital, those are completely tax neutral distributions, because again, in the eyes of the IRS, you put in 100,000 until you get your first 100,000 back out. It's not a taxable event. During the years when we have cash flow distributions, that is a taxable event, but you'll have your carry forward losses, that's your negative bucket from depreciation, that you'll be able to offset your cash flow. So it's likely that you wouldn't have to pay taxes on that because you're just offsetting the passive losses that you've carried forward. One of the really special things about our model is that proceeds that come from a cash out refi are completely tax neutral in the eyes of the IRS. And we purposefully structure our returns so that the majority of the returns come from cash out refi proceeds, because it's much better to get $1 from a cash out refi proceeds and not pay any taxes on it than it is to get $1 from cash flow proceeds that is a taxable event. So if someone receives, say a distribution of, 30,000 from a cash out refi, either that first cash out refi or subsequent cash out refis that happen every, say, 5 to 7 years throughout the duration of our hold, that's really the equivalent of like, 50 or 55,000 that someone would need to earn through earned W-2 income. And then at the very end, then the assets are sold and the final equity is shared out with all of the investors. So you'll get a lump sum of your proportional share of the asset value at that time. There will be what's called depreciation recapture at that time. So when an asset is sold, all of the depreciation that's handed out does need to be recaptured, but we're prolonging that for about 20 to 25 years. So investors will just have to take whatever their final equity payment is and set aside a portion of that for the taxes at that time. But as we've kind of, created our structure over many, many years, this is the exact deal structure we've done for every single thing we have in our portfolio, all of the personal assets that we've, accumulated over the years, all of our joint ventures. We really asked ourselves, number one, how could we take the same bucket of money and use it to acquire things over and over and over and over? And then how could we do so in the most tax efficient way possible? And everything that I just described there is kind of walking through the different phases of the investment and how we've tax optimized it as much as possible during each of those phases. Of course, everyone has a slightly different, tax picture for your personal situation. So talk to your CPA and your advisors. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them over to me and I can ask our CPAs to clarify things for you as well. But in general, that's how I think of the tax advantages. It's pretty staggering, right? Like investment income in general is preferred over earned income. Real estate investment income is heavily incentivized in the tax code because the IRS wants to incentivize the creation and stabilization of high quality housing in the United States. And then particularly coupled with a long-term cash out refi strategy, it's incredibly tax efficient.
Should have gotten you a slide deck. That was like a math
At
masterclass.
8:30 at night. Love
Crushed
it.
it.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right.
Lots of great questions.
Yeah, lots of good questions. I think we hit everything. If you'd like to invest in Boulder Ridge, I hope you're as excited about Boulder Ridge as we are. You can do so at blackswanfund4.com. In the replay email that goes out, we'll have links to Nick's calendar, my calendar. Rachel's always available to help you with any technical questions you may have about setting up the investor portal or connecting for your distributions or those sorts of things. We're here to support you and answer any questions you have. Super excited about Boulder Ridge. Like, it's our Christmas present coming this year, right? Like,
Yep.
It's so good.
Might close on Christmas Day.
Let's not do that. HUD's not open on Christmas. What are you talking about? Thank you guys so much for attending tonight. I hope you are excited about Boulder Ridge. I hope you learned the lens, right? This 4-part step to thinking about how to create life-changing generational wealth. It's really that simple, right? Like it can seem very, very, very complex of like, how do I get into real estate investing? Or how do I know what a good deal is? Or how do I create the value? The deal, the debt, the operations, and the proven plan to increase the asset value. If you just have something for each of those parts of the recipe, you will create staggering life-changing value. That's what we've been doing for the entire time we've been married. We created this wealth for our family. And then we asked ourselves many years ago, how can we involve as many other people as possible? And we started doing joint ventures, then our private equity funds to share out this model so that you too can benefit from all of the pieces that we've brought together if you'd like to invest alongside us.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Take care.